It's that time again. No, not Halloween. That's next week. It's time for me to do another Not Actually Trek Actually video that's all about responding to your comments. That's right. It's not Halloween. It's Half-Assoween, also known as a Not Actually Trek Actually comment response video. Let's get started right now with the first batch of comments. It's like Halloween candy, only it hasn't been laced with anything. That's just a joke. It's an urban myth. That doesn't happen. So, trick or treat with confidence. Just not at my house. I will have no candy for you. This first batch of comments is from a video I did several weeks ago about Star Trek's most versatile actors. This first comment is from Andreas Eld, who says, "If you ask me, you missed Susie Plaxon, playing 4 different characters: Dr. Solar, Tara, Female Q, and Kalar." When I first read this, I thought, who the fuck is Tara? And then I looked it up, and I was like, oh, she was an Andorian on an episode of Enterprise that I completely forgot about. Anyway, good for her. Yes, Susie Plaxon, absolutely. I feel terrible that I didn't even mention her at least. She definitely warranted mention, especially for playing Dr. Solar and Kalar and Lady Q on Voyager. She was fantastic in all of those roles. I literally do not remember her at all as that Andorian lady from Enterprise, but it was Susie Plaxon, so I assume she was good in that as well, because she's good in everything. She's fantastic. She's Susie Plaxon. I feel like a complete fraud as a Star Trek fan that I left her out of my most versatile Star Trek actors video, because she definitely belonged in that video, and probably more than just a mention. She deserved to be examined with a little bit of detail, and I completely dropped the ball on that. So Andreas, thank you so much for correcting me on that. And it was a video that I did take the time to script it, and I did some research, but even when you try your best, it's inevitable. Nobody's perfect. One is going to slip through the cracks. So Susie Plaxon, you were the one, and I very much apologize to you and to all of your fans for leaving you out of that video. But you know what? Nobody's perfect. This next one is from Gronk. What about Brent Spiner? He played 6 characters in addition to Data. In TNG, he played Lore and Dr. Noonien Sung at various ages. Then he went on to play a whole bunch of other Sungs in the Dynasty as well. Okay, yeah, fair enough. I guess that was something that I just missed it because it was right in front of my face. And I guess Brent Spiner should have been mentioned in the video too. Because you're right, he is mostly known for playing Data, and that was his primary role, but he also played a bunch of other characters related to Data. So, yes, Brent Spiner, one of Star Trek's most versatile actors, and I, again, just like with the Susie Plaxon thing, I should have mentioned him, and I didn't, and I feel like kind of a dope for forgetting him, but, that's... Okay, so that's 2. That's 2 that I forgot, and it's just human error, nothing personal against either Brent Spiner or Susie Plaxon. I'm a big fan of them both. I think they both did great work in Star Trek, so, hopefully, no hard feelings. Nobody's perfect. Stuart Guberman, did you forget Mark Alimo? Playing a Romulan, multiple Cardassians, and even a French card player in Time's Arrow. Okay, so, all right, let's just get through it. Let's just go through. Well, I missed a few. Yes, Mark Alimo absolutely played a Romulan, played one of the first Romulan scene in TNG at the end of season 1, played Gul Macet, I believe, the first Cardassian, or one of the first Cardassians seen in TNG, and then, of course, went on to play Gul Dukat, one of the greatest characters in the history of Star Trek. Absolutely classic, inimitable villain. And also, yes, he played the French or perhaps Cajun card player that Data encounters in Time's Arrow after traveling back in time to San Francisco into the 1890s. So, yes, Mark Alimo. Okay, give me another one. Who else? Who else did I forget? Brandon Hutchins. How about an honorable mention for Clint Howard, a.k.a. Commander Baylock? He had additional small appearances in DS9, Enterprise, and Discovery. Clint Howard, for sure. Yes, he was Baylock. He was the guy in past tense in Deep Space Nine who lived in the Sanctuary District who thought he could turn invisible like that guy in Mystery Men. So, yeah, Clint Howard, absolutely. John Bauer, I was waiting for you to mention Morgan Shepard, who has portrayed a number of characters throughout the franchise. Oh my God, Morgan Shepard! W. Morgan Shepard! Oh, yes, of course. Yes, he was Ira Graves in Star Trek TNG, and I think he was also, wasn't he the Klingon guard, the guard of Rura Penthe, or the warden, I guess, of Rura Penthe in Star Trek 6? And he was like the head of the Vulcan Science Academy in Star Trek 2009. The guy who is such a jerk-ass, he goes so far out of his way just to shit-talk Spock's mom that leads to Zachary Quinto as Spock delivering the bitchiest "Live Long and Prosper" ever captured on film. That was W. Morgan Shepard. Yes, fantastic actor, fantastic character actor. Has appeared in a bunch of other stuff as well. In fact, he played Dr. Zito in 2 episodes of another one of my very, very favorite TV shows, MacGyver, the original MacGyver. He was like MacGyver's Hannibal Lecter. So yes, I'm very, very sorry that I missed W. Morgan Shepard. He should have been included for sure. Great actor, great contributions to Star Trek. That's got to be it. I can't have missed anybody else. Boogeyman. James Sloyan played Admiral Jirac and Kimtar/Alexander in TNG, Dr. Mora in DS9, and Dr. Jetrel in Voyager. Quite different characters with emotional ranges and personalities. His scene as Jetrel with Neelix in Voyager is pretty heavy-hitting. Oh my god! Oh, James Sloyan! He's another one like Morgan Shepard. One of my favorite character actors. He was in MacGyver too! He was in 2 MacGyvers, I think. At least 2 MacGyvers. And played different characters. One of them, he was one of the suspects in The Invisible Killer, and then another one, he was one of the teachers that works at the school where MacGyver is like being like a substitute teacher. Yeah, and yes, you named his Star Trek roles. Admiral Jirac and Alexander from the Future in TNG. And he was Dr. Mora, one of my favorite recurring characters from DS9. Odo's abusive, shitty dad, or surrogate dad. Such a great character, such a great actor. James Sloyan. James, I'm sorry. But that can't be anymore. Nick Fontaine, no mention of Jerry Hardin. I guess there has to be a cutoff somewhere, but I'm a little surprised he didn't make the cut. Well, apparently there doesn't have to be a cutoff. At least not as far as actors that I should have included in the video that I didn't. Jerry Hardin, who was one of the guys from the planet, was it When the Bow Breaks in season 1 where they kidnap the children because they can't have children of their own, so they take the kids off the Enterprise? And then he was also Mark Twain in Time's Arrow and outside of Star Trek. I mean, he was in a million things, but he was Deep Throat in The X-Files, which, again, one of my favorite recurring characters from one of my favorite shows. And he was in Star Trek, and I forgot him. Oh, Jerry. I apologize. My bad, Jerry. But that's okay. Is there a cutoff? Was Jerry the cutoff? Granny Gamer 1. Excuse me, just gonna butt in here for a hot second. One actor, arguably brilliant, is universally overlooked in Star Trek discussions. He may not have had opportunities to be as prolific as others, but one performance in particular was so gut-wrenching and graceful. Captain Dathan in Darmok. Paul Winfield has one of the most impressive filmographies of the 20th century, spanning 1967 to 2003, including Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., Sounder, and Roots. I have no idea why he always gets left out of Star Trek conversations. Paul Winfield, yes, he was in Darmok. He was Captain Dathan in Darmok, and he was Captain Terrell, Chekhov's commanding officer, the captain of the USS Reliant, in Star Trek 2. And you're right. He was a brilliant actor, a truly brilliant actor. One of those actors that I've talked about a few times in previous videos, like Christopher Plummer or Louise Fletcher, or like Paul Sorvino. You just see this random appearance of this absolutely legendary, brilliant actor, and you're like, they're in Star Trek? Yes, and Paul Winfield deserves to be on that list, so damn. Paul Winfield. That's another one I completely missed. My bad. Sorry, Paul, you're dead, but sorry, Paul. I'm sorry you're dead, and I'm sorry I left you out of my video. That you probably wouldn't have watched if you were alive, but not the point. Sorry. Okay, now, is that it? Okay, I think that's it. That's it, yeah. Those are the only ones I forgot. that I'm mentioning in this video. Now, these next several comments are from my most recent Trek Actually video that was about reimagining the TNG-era movies if the crew of the Enterprise had actually been allowed to leave the Enterprise at some point. This first one is from Christopher D. Drew, who says, I really like the first Contact intro change. I think that would have spilled over into the next two movies in interesting ways. It always bugged me that Riker didn't get his own command. I understood why he didn't for TV show reasons, but in universe, I always found the explanation lacking. Well, yeah, that's the thing that bugs me about it, too, is, yeah, for a TV series, I get it. You want to have Jonathan Frakes on the show, so the best way to keep Jonathan Frakes on the show and Patrick Stewart on the show is to say, well, Riker is the first officer and Picard's the captain, and let's just keep it that way, right? You're doing a TV series, it's week to week. And yeah, sure, keep everybody where they're at because you want to keep all the actors. Easiest way to do it. Makes total sense from a commercial standpoint and just sort of a structural, logistical standpoint. But when you get to the movies and you're not doing 23, 24, 25 episodes a year, you're doing one movie every 2 or 3 years at the pace that the TNG movies came out. Why not have the characters go to different places? And then you can say, well, the story of the movies, because theoretically the movies, you want the stories of the movies to be a bigger deal than something you would have done on the TV show anyway. So have the story of the movie be constructed in such a way that it draws the characters back together. You don't need to say, well, they're still on the Enterprise and they've been on the Enterprise in their same jobs for the last 2 years since the last time you saw them. 2 years have gone by. They can be out doing whatever they want. Imagine something else for them to do, and then they come back together. They are drawn together again for this adventure that we see in the movie. It made no sense to me why they never moved any of them on. I mean, I don't necessarily think they needed to take all 7 core characters and scatter them to the winds, but at least take 2 or 3 of them and say, hey, time has passed, life has gone on. They don't all work on the Enterprise anymore. We still get to see them. They're still part of the story of the movie. They're still important. They're still part of the family. They're, members of the core cast. But within the fiction of the story, they've gone on to do other things. Like, it doesn't, yeah, I agree. It made sense for the TV series. It doesn't make sense for the movies. J. Dodify, Steve, you've never explained how your screen grabs have this weird uncanny valley about them. Well, okay, that's because for the last year, roughly, I've been using Topaz AI to upscale the screen grabs that I use to illustrate my Star Trek videos. And usually it does a really good job. Every once in a while, if the screen grab is low resolution, which unfortunately, if it's for pretty much anything other than a movie or TNG, it's gonna be because the recent series, the more recent series are in the screen grabs you can find are in big, high resolution. But the screen grabs for like Deep Space Nine and Voyager and Enterprise, those are low resolution because those series have never been released in a high definition release. They've never been released like in Blu-ray or, anything like that. So all we have are standard definition screen caps of them. And sometimes when you start with a low resolution image and you feed it into the AI upscaler, sometimes the results are a little wonky. Usually it doesn't bother me. If you think some of the ones I've used in the videos have been strange or whatever, you should see some of the ones that I haven't used. Some of them do get pretty weird when it's like, what was the AI thinking there? But yes, I do that so that I have higher resolution images that I can use in my video. I can zoom in and do pans and zooms and stuff with them. Have a little bit of movement in the still images, and still have them look good in terms of resolution, so they're not all blotchy and full of artifacts and, whatever. And I'm very happy with the results. I know some people are a little put off by the fact that every once in a while, like a face looks a little different, or sometimes with some of the Bajoran characters in Deep Space Nine episodes, if the nose ridges aren't defined enough in the original image, the AI upscaler will just kind of smooth out the nose and it looks a little unusual. But honestly, it doesn't bother me. At least it doesn't bother me enough that I'm not going to use it anymore. And it doesn't seem to bother most people who watch the videos. There's just a small subset of the audience that sees it and goes, what's going on there? And feels the need to comment about it. So hopefully it's not that big of a deal to you all, because I do plan to keep using that program because I'm very happy with the results and very happy that I am able to take low resolution images and now upscale them to high resolution. So they look a lot crisper and a lot better on in the finished video than they would otherwise. So I'm going to keep doing it. I hope it's not a problem, but that is why sometimes they look a little uncanny valley, a little wonky, is because the AI upscaler is not always perfect, and sometimes it's not quite sure what to do with some of the faces in the lower resolution images. So, Adam T. Steve, I'd hoped you would mention the fact that of all the Trek series, the one with the most dynamic change in its casting and the relations of its characters has been Disco. And Disco has flourished because of this dynamism. Not only has it introduced us to 2 different eras in the life of the Federation, but there have been 4 different captains, new crew persons every season, new Starfleet admirals, and a completely solid rotating cast of supporting players. It is a very dynamic series and deserves to be regarded as such and praised for what it does very, very well. Oh yeah, and it also gave us the literal first contact with a truly alien, totally non-humanoid species since V'ger in 1979. Yes, you're absolutely right. I guess I could have mentioned Discovery as an example of how it can be done, because I did mention the TNG movies as an example of moving the characters on a little bit in contrast to the TNG movies. And I guess the TOS movies made for a more sensible comparison because they came before the TNG movies, and so that they were available to use as a little bit of like a blueprint or inspiration, whereas Discovery didn't come along until many years later. But yes, you're absolutely right. I agree with you. I do think that the way Discovery has handled its cast and has created a series where we see that characters advance and change and grow and sometimes move on to other assignments and then come back. I think it's done a very good job with that. So you're totally right to point that out and to ask that the show be complimented on that, because I agree with you. It's done a fantastic job with that. And it deserves to be held up as an example of how you can take a show with a solid returning cast of characters, a core group that you bring back every year, and you can still add and subtract to that in ways that, as you say, make it feel more dynamic than just however many seasons of all the same people in all the same places. It can be done in a series, not just in the movies. So Discovery definitely deserves kudos for that. Mark Malabranch suggested rewrite to your rewrite of Nemesis. Picard and the Enterprise crew are scouring various planets, collecting the different parts of B4. They find all but one. Suddenly there is a hail from another starship. It's the Lollipop. Picard orders communication up on the view screen. Riker appears and says, "Captain, do you need a hand?" At which point he produces one of B4's arms from off-screen. Oh, nicely done. Nicely done. Come on, and not just me. Come on, somebody else. Help me out here. Yes. Nicely done. Tiger Bread 78. I don't know, 2 consecutive ship rescues, Lollipop and Defiant, to get major crew members back on the Enterprise would seem a bit heavy-handed. Yeah, I agree. I thought about that when I was coming up with that scenario, and I had the same concern. My other idea that I didn't mention in the video was to just have both the Enterprise and Riker's ship, the Lollipop, or whatever it would be called in the real movie, have them both go back through the temporal vortex after the Borg, and then just have 2 ships in the 21st century and the Borg ship. And maybe the Borg could transport themselves over to Riker's ship and take that ship over instead of the Enterprise. And then they'd have to destroy the Lollipop as, the Enterprise's story in orbit while some of the crew is down on the ground with Cochrane and the rest of the characters are up, still in space. That could be the story. Instead of fighting off the Borg from taking over the Enterprise, it would be the Enterprise versus the Borgified Lollipop. But that creates a whole bunch of problems on its own that you would have to figure out solutions to. So maybe the best solution would be what I said after I pitched my idea, which is, First Contact is pretty damn good just as is. Even though the whole premise of my video is they should have moved the Enterprise crew off into other assignments, maybe we can say, look, First Contact is pretty great just as is. Maybe we shouldn't tamper with that. Maybe we should just start the process of moving the characters onto different places in the movie after that. So yeah, but I completely agree. There are certain problems that come up no matter what you do, because First Contact is a pretty tightly plotted movie, and anything you add to it is going to complicate that. And complicating it isn't necessarily going to be a problem if you do it right, but it isn't necessarily going to help either. You know, most of the time, making a movie more complicated is not a path to improvement, especially if the movie is pretty good already, as First Contact is. First Contact is very good already. So it's a very iffy proposition. And I explored it because that was the premise of my video, and it was just sort of a thought experiment, just kind of a fun thing of how would it have been different if this. But in real life, would it have made the movie better? Maybe not. So your criticism here, I think, is very valid and is one that occurred to me as well. The Cynical Optimist. Additionally, I would have had 3 characters on the Defiant, Worf and Miles as the 2 TNG characters who went to DS9, but with Sisko in command. The whole revenge story would have made much more sense with it being Sisko anyway, and there could have been more great interplay between Sisko and Picard. I would have kept Picard down on the planet solving stuff there, with Sisko up on the Enterprise. First of all, it's more characters than you need. I mean, if you bring in Sisko and O'Brien in addition to Worf and the other characters there, so you put Sisko in charge of things on the Enterprise, and you put Picard in charge of things on the planet. What do you do with Riker? What do you do with Geordi? What do you do with Troy? I mean, what do you do with Data? Is Data on the Enterprise with Sisko? What sense does that make? What is the relationship between Sisko and Data? For that matter, what is the relationship between Sisko and the Borg? I mean, I know that he was at Wolf 359 and his wife was killed in that battle, but Sisko versus the Borg was never a thing on Deep Space Nine. You know, I mean, there was the tension between him and Picard as a result of it in the first episode. But after that, like, you didn't get the idea that Sisko was harboring some kind of, resentment toward the Borg and he was like out for revenge. It just wasn't a story that was waiting to be told. So, with all due respect, and you're not the first person who has proposed this. I've seen people say this. Oh boy, if they were going to have the Defiant, they should have had Sisko in it. I really think that would have been a big mistake. It would have made the movie too busy. It would have done a disservice to the actors and characters from TNG, who I think deserved their own film, and I think proved with First Contact that they were perfectly capable of carrying a film and being the focus of a really kick-ass great Star Trek movie. And as much as I love Deep Space Nine, and I've said many times, Deep Space Nine is my favorite Star Trek series. No way did I want to see Deep Space Nine characters in First Contact, or any other TNG movie, because those were TNG movies. You want to make Deep Space Nine movies? Great. I would love a Deep Space Nine movie, or I would have 20 years ago. Now, not so much. But back when the show was on, or was still relatively fresh, yeah, sure. Come up with a great idea, make a great Deep Space Nine movie. That's awesome. And in that Deep Space Nine movie, I don't want people from Voyager showing up. I don't want people from TNG showing up. It's a Deep Space Nine movie. So, again, I know not everybody sees it that way. A lot of fans have this sort of fan fiction mentality where it's like, well, we'll just pick and choose like a William Shatner Star Trek novel. We'll take one from over here and one from over here, and we'll have a character from Voyager and characters from DS9 and characters from TNG and characters from TOS, and we'll just bring them all together and have like a big, like a monster rally movie from Universal, right? That's just not, that doesn't interest me. If I'm going to go see a TNG movie, I want a TNG movie with characters from TNG. Now, these next several comments are from my video about reimagining Pen Pals as a Wesley episode instead of a Data episode. This first one is from Empathetic Rambo. I feel weirdly defensive about the original episode. I can see how the changes work better in some ways, though. Well, here's the thing. That video and that sort of exercise wasn't meant to say that the version of the episode I imagined would have been better. It's just that how would it have been different? That was a commissioned video, and the commission was rewrite Pen Pals as a Wesley episode, so that's what I did. I was pretty happy with how it came out, too. I think I came up with some pretty good stuff in that video. I think my pitch was interesting. And I mean, obviously we'll never know because that episode will never actually exist. And it's foolhardy at best to compare imaginary episodes to episodes that actually exist that we can watch and judge. But I would like to think that if something like the story I pitched were actually scripted and made back in the day, that it would have made a pretty good episode. I don't know. Would it have been better than the pen pals we actually got? Who knows? But the point of it wasn't to say if it had been a Wesley episode, it would have been better. Or specifically, if it had been the Wesley episode I am describing, it would have been better. It's just, here's how it would have been different. And maybe it would have been better. Maybe not. I don't know. But that was the point. So whenever I do like a rewrite video, the point isn't necessarily to say, and if they had done it my way, it would have been so much better than what they did. It's more just to say, let's have a fun thought experiment and imagine how things might be different, might have been different if this, and this were in place. So, yeah, I mean, it's completely fine to feel defensive of the original episode. The video wasn't meant as an attack on the original episode. It was just meant as a hypothetical, so your feelings are valid. You're perfectly fine to prefer the original to the version I pitched. In fact, it makes more sense to prefer the original to what I pitched because the one I pitched doesn't exist. The original does. So go with the original. Tony Buca, this was pretty fun. You hit on an interesting note in your comments after the episode that made me wish it was brought up a little bit more explicitly in the rewrite. You mentioned that this all comes about because Wes is suddenly given responsibility. And I feel like there's some fertile ground there to have Wes's actions be born out of a feeling of responsibility to help this person, rather than Data's empathy in the original version. Well, thank you very much. When I do rewrites like that, when I pitch alternate versions of episodes, like I did something similar with when I pitched a rewrite of the Enterprise series finale and the Voyager series finale, I tried to find like the essence of things. Like with Enterprise and Voyager, it was these are the last episodes. So what are these shows about? Like if you can boil it down to just one idea, what are these shows about? And with Voyager, it was they want to go home. Like if you can strip away everything else, the heart of Voyager, and to me the most compelling thing about it, that they didn't really take advantage of most of the time, but nevertheless, was that these people were far from home and they wanted to get home. With Enterprise, it was these are pioneers, they're in the early stages of what we know from other Star Trek shows is going to become this great Federation, this great Starfleet, and these are kind of the first people to really make that happen. So let's see we'll see them at the end of their voyage and as they're kind of moving on and they're stepping into the future that they have helped to create. Like that was kind of the idea with my Enterprise finale rewrite. And with Pen Pals, putting it as a Wesley episode, what's the essence of Wesley? Who is Wesley? Or at least, what is it about him that I personally, as the writer in this case, find the most interesting? What is it that I can grab onto about him and say, I get that. That makes sense to me. I can do something with that. I can work with that. And it's the idea that he's a young person who is growing, and he is growing up in a world that he has been inculcated, in for his entire life. He was pretty much born to be a Starfleet officer. At least at this point in the show, that doesn't happen for him ultimately. But in season 2 of the show, it's like, yeah, he's a boy genius. He's a wonderkind. That part of his character never interested me at all. It's the idea that he's a young person. He's maturing. He is figuring out who he is in this world. And he has internalized all of these values and virtues about Starfleet. In a way, he represents the best of Starfleet because he's an innocent. He hasn't really seen much of the dark side or the complicated side or when you have to make compromises. He has just sort of internalized what Starfleet is, what Starfleet stands for. And that idea that you express in your comment, he wants to help Sarjenka because he feels it's the responsible thing to do. He's Starfleet. He has the power to help. And it feels wrong to him to just let this person die, let this planet full of people die, when he has the power to help. Because he's from Starfleet, and that's what Starfleet is supposed to do. It's supposed to uphold these principles and carry these principles out into the galaxy. And just turning our backs on people in need is not what we should do. That doesn't jibe with the Starfleet that I was taught about since I was a little baby by my mom and my dad. Right? So that's who Wesley is. And that drives him in the story. So yeah, I do think that should have been, I tried to make that a part of him. You're right. It's not super explicit in my episode as described, but I think that's part of his character in that. And I do think it would have been much better for Wesley in the show. Who cares whether my episode would have been good or not? But the idea of making that sense of Wesley has internalized this Starfleet stuff, and he really believes it, and he really tries to live by it in a pure way, and sometimes that makes life easier, and sometimes that makes life more difficult for him and for the people on the ship that live with him, but that's his starting point. And that may grow and evolve and change over the course of the show, but that's where he's at this point. And I think that could have been really interesting. And unfortunately, they really didn't go that direction with Wesley. Here's one from Insolence A. The one thing I'd change is maybe have something more from Wesley's team toward the end to pay off the working relationship they were starting to build. Maybe one of them says, if you told me a kid's life was in danger, I would have helped. And Wesley's all, I wasn't going to get you in trouble, etc. Sometimes being in charge does mean shielding your team from responsibility. And sometimes it means relying on their support. Could have gone either way for Wesley's arc in the episode. Really enjoyed the video as always. Thank you very much. And yeah, I agree with you. I think that scene would have been good. And there probably would have been room for it. Because as a couple people also pointed out in the comments to that video, my version does not have a B story. My version is just about Wesley and his story and his interactions with Sarjenka and with Captain Picard and others on the ship as a result of his story. So there is no B plot. And I don't think it would need one. I think enough would have to happen in the episode that we wouldn't need a B plot to fill stuff in. But there still might be some room for scenes like that. And I do think that would be an excellent scene and would be a way of bringing the team back in toward the end instead of just dropping that. Because I do think in my version, once Wesley finds Sarjenka and that becomes his story, the stuff with him working with the survey team does kind of disappear from my version. And that is less than ideal. So yeah, having that scene maybe at the end or near the end, maybe right before his final scene with Captain Picard, I think would have worked really well to bring the team back into it at the end. So it doesn't seem like we completely forgot about them. And I do think that would be a good scene. And again, a good beat for Wesley for the team to say, we would have helped you. And for Wesley to say, I didn't want you to help me. I didn't want to risk getting you in trouble too. That, again, would show a level of growth and maturity and awareness from Wesley. I think that would have been a good scene. That's a very good addition. These next few comments are from my video about the 10 best episodes of the current era of Star Trek TV series. And the first one is from Oasis, who says, Steve, I want to hear you share your favorite episodes from Picard and Lower Decks. Even though you don't care much for either of these series, there still has to be something that you at least like, even if it isn't top 10 worthy. Well, yes, there are some episodes from each show that I would call good episodes. And actually, I replied to this comment in the comment thread, but I wanted to say it here too, because I thought other folks watching might be interested. Because I do like to take cheap shots at Lower Decks, because I've said before, it's just not for me. It's not my kind of thing. I don't really get why people think it's as good as some people think it is. And I've been very hard on, especially season 2 of Picard. So I would like to say that I don't think that they're completely without merit or completely without value. I mean, Picard season 2 is, but Picard season 1 had its moments. So if I were going to talk about episodes from Picard that I thought were at least okay, I would probably say The Impossible Box, which is the one where Picard finally reaches the Borg cube, the artifact, and is reunited with Hugh. And then also Nepenthe, of course, which is the episode where Picard and Soji go to the planet Nepenthe to take refuge for a little while with Will Riker and Deanna Troi. Mostly a standalone episode, not, Picard doesn't really have any standalone episodes, but for Picard, a relatively standalone episode. And I thought it was very good. I thought it was a good episode. And for Lower Decks, a couple episodes from season 1. I still think season 1 is probably the best that Lower Decks has been so far. It's gone downhill precipitously for me in the seasons 2 and 3. But the first episode, the pilot, Second Contact, is still, I think, maybe the best episode they've done yet, which is not ideal for a series to say the first episode you've done after 3 years is still your best episode, but it is really good. It establishes the premise. It introduces us to all the characters in a really efficient way. It's funny, which for me is unusual for Lower Decks, because one of my big problems with the show is that it almost never makes me laugh. But there are genuinely funny things in the first episode. I still think the running gag of Rutherford going on a date with the incredibly perilous, ship crisis with the crew turning into zombies kind of happening in the background as Rutherford tries to continue his date is hilarious, is an inspired gag. I wish that the show had jokes that funny a lot more often than it does, but it did in the first episode, and it was really good. And also, there was the episode Moist Vessel, where Tendi interrupts the crew members' attempt to ascend to a higher plane, and then she spends the rest of the episode trying to make it up to him, and finally he does ascend. But when he does, the experience is terrifying, and he sees the koala, and he's like, why is the koala smiling? And again, it was weird, it was absurd, and it was funny. And it wasn't based on a fucking Easter egg Star Trek reference. It was original. And I really, really liked it. I thought it was terrific. And then also Terminal Provocations, which is the one that introduces Badgie. And Badgie is funny. And again, not an Easter egg. Not fan service, not remember this, remember that time when Captain Picard did that thing on the... They lean on that shit way too often. Badgie is funny. And Badgie's first episode, where it builds up to Rutherford having to break his neck, it's so dark and so over the top, and a great satire of those kind of, gritty, dark, grim stories. And Badgie himself is a hysterical creation. So yes, Terminal Provocations would also be one. So there are a few Lower Decks episodes that I do that I have enjoyed. And there are even a couple of Picard episodes. So there you go. Here's one from the podcast from Firetop Mountain. My favorite thing about Pike being unable to save the first servant is just that. He can't save him. He's unable to save the day. He can't create a magic techno thing which causes the society to no longer need the first servant. He's not able to swing in like a hero and save everyone like Kirk would do back in the day. He's fallible, utterly human. He can't stop the first human's forced sacrifice, and that's a huge subversion of Trek tropes. I love that. In the end, he has to live with his inability to change things. He can't make everything right, and similarly, cannot change his own fate. It's an exceptionally strong use of the standard heroes find a utopian society with a dark secret, blow things up, and save the day plot in a whole new way. I could not agree more. I also think that ending is absolutely crucial to the power of the episode. I think if Pike had managed to rescue him somehow, that would have seriously undercut the episode in several different ways that you mentioned in your comment. It would have hurt Pike's character arc, the relation of the first servant's fate to Pike's knowledge of his own fate. It's just, and one of the things that I just found interesting and maybe a little aggravating from some of our fellow Trek fans is I know there were people, I think there were people who even left comments on that video when I praised that episode. They said, oh, I hated that episode. I can't believe they killed a kid. It's fiction. They didn't actually kill a kid. The story had a very dark ending. I mean, you're not supposed to be happy that the first servant ends up that way. You're supposed to be disgusted by it, and you're supposed to want Pike to save him. But sometimes a good story doesn't give you what you want. Sometimes what makes the story good is the fact that it sets you up and it's successful in wanting you to want a particular outcome and then depriving you of that outcome in a way that feels tragic, that feels sad, that feels like, oh, I wish he could have saved that kid, but he couldn't. And you identify with Pike because you see that Pike wanted to save him so badly. Pike was so disgusted by what was happening. It tore him apart at his very core. We've seen that Pike is such a compassionate and principled person. And because we know him that way, and because he has been established so well as that in the show, we know that it just rips him apart that he has to leave that kid there like that. But he has no choice, and that's what gives the story its power. Here's one from Don Eisenbarth. I literally screamed for joy when you named Time Amok as number 2. That's right where it belongs, and I was worried Prodigy, which I personally think is going to be this franchise's Clone Wars, a cartoon that unknowingly shapes the entire franchise in a decade or two, wouldn't show up at all. Good list. Actually, I just watched Time Amok again yesterday, and it's a fantastic episode. It is absolutely rock solid. It is airtight. It's 24 minutes. There's not an ounce of fat on it, but it doesn't feel crammed or rushed. It has just enough time for everything to have as much room as it needs to breathe, but the plot keeps moving, and the premise is explored in a really, really clever way. It's a fantastic twist on like a time travel story or a shattered timelines story, and the story at the end with Rock Talk and how, she teaches herself all this math and engineering to build the warp matrix to save the day. It's a wonderful episode. It's an ingenious and clever and heartbreaking and wonderful episode. So that was one of the ones that was pretty much set in stone. When I was doing the list, there were a few episodes that kind of, as I was going through different versions of it and thinking about things, and do I want this episode here or what? There were some episodes that were on the list early on that ended up not on the list, and there were some changes in order before I finally sort of locked it in and said, okay, this is the version for the video. But Memento Mori from Strange New Worlds was always going to be number 1, and Time Amok was always going to be number 2. I mean, it's a great episode. And one more from the top 10 episode from Kai Anthony. One point I think you made about the Comet episode that stuck with me is Uhura. There's more character development, motivation, backstory in maybe 22 minutes of screen time than there had been in 40 years of Uhura's on screen up to that point. I really hope the great Nichelle Nichols saw the episode before she passed. Well, and the thing about Uhura's characterization and the thing about the characterization of all of the supporting characters on Strange New Worlds is that it's very strong and it is accomplished with a minimum of screen time. And it just goes to show that you don't always need to devote an entire episode or multiple episodes to a character in order for the audience to get who they are. I mean, Uhura in Strange New Worlds is a great example. And an even better example is Ortegas, who has such a strong presence in the show. I feel like I know her. There hasn't been an Ortegas episode yet. She hasn't had a ton of screen time. She's had some, and she has been used in a very effective way so that it feels like we get her personality, we get the kind of person she is, we get her relationships to different characters. We've seen her interact with Captain Pike, and they have kind of a rapport with each other, which is one of my favorite parts of the show. She's had interactions with Uhura and with Chapel, and we've seen her, talk to other characters and interact with other characters on the show, and we get a sense of who she is. Now, we don't know a ton about her biography. We don't know a ton about her backstory, but that's not characterization. It can be part of characterization, sure, but exposition is not always necessary. to give us a sense of who a character is. You don't need to know anything about their origin story. You don't need to know anything about their backstory. You don't need to know anything about anything that happened to them before the first time you saw them on the show. And you can still get a feeling for who they are, why they are important to the show. What is it that you like about them? What is it that you feel like you want to watch more of them? That's characterization. And Ortegas has it, and Uhura has it, and Chapel has it. Every character on that show has it. Within the first 2 or 3 episodes of Strange New Worlds, I felt like I knew that bridge crew better than I still think I know the bridge crew of Discovery. And I'm not taking a shit on Discovery. I like Discovery for the most, but I've enjoyed Discovery a lot, and there were a lot of Discovery episodes on that top 10 list. But Discovery's had 4 seasons now. I still don't really feel like I know who Owoshikun is. I feel like I know Detmer a little bit. They've given Detmer a little bit of a story with her sort of PTSD storyline that they gave her a little bit in season 3. I thought that was good. But I still don't really feel like I know her. And the other one, like Bryce, Reese, forget about it. I have no idea who these people are. I mean, I know who they are. Like, I recognize them when I see them, but I don't feel like I know them as people. But I feel like I know Ortegas. I feel like I know Uhura, this Uhura, not just because I've seen Uhura in other things. I feel like I know this Uhura. Because the show is great at characterization. Now, these next few are from my tribute video to Louise Fletcher. This one is from Chris Blake. The thing about life support for me was how it showed the gnawing lack of self-confidence at Wynn's core. Her ambition and scheming wasn't some grand plan to serve her version of the faith. Everything was just a tool to garner validation and love for herself. Ultimately, we learn late in the series that Wynn has been carrying this secret around, which is that the prophets don't speak to her. Even though she is their representative, even though she's the leader of the faith that has been built around their prophecies and their teachings, her God, or gods in this case, are silent when it comes to her. She's never heard the voice of the prophets. She's never seen them or spoken to them. Other people have had orb experiences where they get visions from the prophets, or in some cases have actually gone into the wormhole and spoken to the prophets themselves. Kai Wynn, leader of the faith, has never spoken to the prophets. And that gnaws at her. That bothers her. That is a source of villainous motivation for her ultimately. And your take on life support, and you're sort of observing that she has a lack of self-confidence at the center of her, that matches with that very well. So like I say, that could have been the plan for Wynn all along, although I suspect, knowing how good the writers at Deep Space Nine were at making up new things that fit with the things that they had previously established, I think that was probably something they came up with for her late in the run, but it could have been otherwise. But it works really well together. You establish that she is a user of people. She does manipulate people and callously just sort of push people into positions that will serve her, because she needs the validation. She needs the praise. There is a deep insecurity to her. And then eventually you learn part of that insecurity is that she is in this position where she is the leader of a faith, and the God of the faith speaks to other people, but has never spoken to her. So, yeah, again, the characterization seems to be the theme of this video, but it's a great bit of characterization for Wynn. Chris M. Walker, she made Avery Brooks Sisko better in his role too. I loved his expression whenever someone told him she was on the station or wanted to talk to him. Kind of like when you hear your mother-in-law is coming to visit. Yes, and the best part of that, and one of the things that made Wynn unique as a villain on Deep Space Nine and just in Star Trek in general, is because of who she was, and because of the way she went about conducting her villainous business, where everything was indirect and nothing came back to her. And just because of her position in Bajoran society. Like, yeah, again, I keep saying she was the space pope. She's the leader of the church. She was an official person. Like, she was in a very high ceremonial, cultural, official position. So it's not like you could just kill her or arrest her or take her out of the picture. Like, if she was some kind of outlaw, or she was some kind of leader of a rogue state, or the head of state of some enemy alien society that was attacking the Federation or whatever, like, the story would end with her being arrested or her being on a ship that was blown up in a battle or something. But you know that Wynn's story can't end that way because she's legitimate, at least superficially. It's not like Sisko can just take her out. I mean, maybe he could, he could whisper something in Garrick's ear. Could you get rid of Wynn for me? But he doesn't do that. And, you never really expect him to. But yeah, he's stuck with her. I think that's one of the things that makes her such a great villain. It makes her such a reliable irritant to the protagonists, is that she has achieved this place in her society of legitimacy and virtual untouchability. And you know that she's the worst, but there's nothing you can do about it. You're stuck with her. And now these last few comments are from my video about Star Trek's Mirror Universe and whether or not it's worth revisiting. This one is from Wooga, who says, "What I'd like to see is a mirror take on Prodigy, with the twist being that the lives of the characters are actually better in the Mirror Universe. So much better that it becomes a trolley problem for the heroes. Given the love the writers have for Trek history, I would be more surprised if they didn't do this." A Mirror Universe episode is kind of inevitable, especially because it's a kids' show and the Mirror Universe is such a potentially fun concept that it would be perfect. It's tailor-made for a kids' show. So I wouldn't be surprised if they do a Mirror Universe show at some point. But I do now that you've said this, I kind of hope if they do a Mirror Universe show that they do something like this, because it's a great idea. And it's a fresh take on the Mirror Universe. That's something I was saying in the video. Like, that's what I'm desperate for. If they keep going back to the Mirror Universe, and I wish they wouldn't. I wish they would just let it go. But if they keep coming back to it, at least try to find new angles on it. Find a new joke, or find a new twist, or a new perspective to look at it from, or something. And this idea that you have of, they go to the Mirror Universe, but their mirror counterparts are actually better off than they are in the Prime Universe, that's a good idea. And these are characters you can do that with, because these are misfits. Like, they're not Starfleet officers in the Federation. Like, they're misfits who've been chased around the entire show so far. So if they find themselves in the Mirror Universe and they're like happy people, they're actually doing well, that's a really intriguing twist. I really think that could go someplace interesting. So now I'm going to kind of be disappointed when Prodigy inevitably does a Mirror Universe episode and it's not like this, because this is a good idea. Zoe Malduran, not sure if anyone said it on the video yet, but I've heard it said before that Living Witness was the closest that Voyager ever came to a Mirror Universe episode with the evil versions in the museum. So at least in terms of let the cast have fun playing scenery-chewing evil counterparts for an episode, Voyager kinda had one too. Got to agree that Mirror Steve needs a beard too. You do indeed look more awesome with one. And bonus, that episode also, because they use not going into another universe, but they use it's people in the far future looking back on Voyager and reconstructing their story with incomplete and unreliable information. Not only do they get to do the evil version of the crew and have the cast be allowed to kind of ham it up a little bit more and play the opposite versions of themselves, but it also gets to actually have somewhat of a message in there about the fallibility and the subjectivity of history, which you can't really do with the Mirror Universe. So it's not just finding a fresh excuse to do the fun part of the Mirror Universe and have the actors get to chew the scenery, but you get to add an extra layer on top of it. So it's a very clever way to do a version of that without doing it. So that's also a good comment and a good thing to bring up. And it's been a while since I've actually seen the episode. I don't recall thinking that the episode itself was actually anything outstanding. But it's a really interesting premise. And when you look at it, especially compared to like a Mirror Universe episode, you see that it has certain virtues that most of the post-Mirror Universe episodes lack. Here's one from Michael Hanel. Would love to see a full-length movie of the Mirrorverse. Nope. No. Nobody pay attention to Michael. Michael is talking nonsense. Last comment. Hey, everybody, last comment. It's from Carlos D. Rodriguez, who says, Mirror did give us one of the best Kirk quotes. If change is inevitable, predictable, beneficial, doesn't logic demand that you be a part of it? That is a great Kirk quote, and it is perhaps the ultimate expression of one of Kirk's most endearing / infuriating character traits, his tendency, as we see throughout classic Star Trek, to show up at a planet, notice what's wrong with their society, blow it up, and then just leave and never come back. He does that to an entire universe. I mean, we don't get to see the results. We don't even get to see the change actually happen. He just plants the seed. He gets Spock to possibly do his dirty work. He gets Spock to think about it and go, Spock, this whole Empire thing, this isn't really working. And you even can admit logically this is unsustainable. You should blow this whole thing up, man. And Spock goes, I'll think about it. And Kirk's like, you do that, buddy. I'm out of here. And he leaves the universe. It's bad enough when he does that to a planet and then just leaves the planet and never comes back. He does that. He Kirks out. He leaves an entire universe. And he's like, good luck with that whole toppling the Empire thing. Hope that goes okay for you. Bye. And he leaves and he never comes back. Classic Kirk. Classic Kirk. And now I will take a cue from Captain Kirk, and I am going to leave as well. But of course, I will come back. So it's not like Kirk at all. But it's kind of like Kirk in the sense that I'm going to leave like Kirk. So, yeah, anyway, thanks all for the comments. Thank you so much for watching these videos, for commenting on these videos, for asking such awesome questions, for making such insightful observations and checking me on things and adding to things that I've said and giving me opportunities to look at things from a different angle. I really, really love reading your comments and getting to make videos and talk about them like this. I make fun of it for being, cheap, easy content, but it really is fun and it really is cool. So thank you all so much. My batteries are done charging. Thank you all so much for watching, and please continue to watch, and please continue to engage with me and leave comments, and I will keep making these videos as long as you are leaving comments on my other ones. Don't forget, if you want to support this channel, you can do so by becoming a patron at patreon.com/Steve Shives, becoming a channel member by clicking the join button, or by making a one-time gift via the thanks button, or via PayPal or Venmo, and links to those are in the video description. I will be back soon enough with another Star Trek video and other videos about all kinds of other topics as well. And I will be back in a couple of months for another one of these where I will be happy to respond to a few more of your excellent, wonderful comments. So thanks once again, everybody, for everything you do for me, for your attention, for your support, for all of this. Take care. And I will see you next time.